Hey, what's up everyone? Bestinwest here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going over a Pokemon that has been underwhelming so far in the Great League, but has a crazy stat distribution because of its bulk. It puts itself in a very unique position to absorb a ton of charge moves and deal a little bit of damage back. So, this is Best's Breakdown, Chansey and the Rose Cup. So, getting into the basics, Chansey is a normal type, which makes it extremely weak to fighting type moves, but the thing is, it also double resists ghost type moves. So, Chansey's already super tanky, and being double resistant to ghost type moves from Haunter, Sableye, Driftblim, that will be huge. I have seen a lot of Haunters in this cup, so double resisting that is just going to make Chansey even better. But there's a large amount of fighting types, but again, Chansey is super bulky and can absorb a lot of those fighting type moves. So even though Chansey is a normal type, it can tank like at least 2 to 3 dynamic punches from Medicham. The preferred moveset for Chansey is going to be Pound as the fast move, and the charge move of Hyper Beam and Psychic. Hyper Beam is the strongest normal type move, and Chansey gets stab from it, but Psychic will hit those fighting types for a good amount of damage, and it charges to it much faster as well. So that's the preferred moveset. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so the main source of damage from Chansey is going to be from the fast attack. If you are running it as a lead, you might also be able to burn some shields on your opponent that doesn't know the matchups against Chansey. Chansey again has charge moves of Psychic and Hyper Beam, and if they know that Chansey has Hyper Beam, they will probably assume that Hyper Beam will do a ton of damage. But because Chansey's attack stats very low, it is kind of underwhelming even with that stab bonus. But the main reason why Pound is the main source of damage is because even against Pokemon that resist normal type moves such as Ghosts, that resistance isn't helping that Pokemon that much, because the minimum amount of damage that can be done is 1 damage. So no matter what happens, no matter how many resistances the opponent has, your fast attacks will do at least 1 damage to that Pokemon. That is why Pound is so good against Steels, Ghosts, anything that resists normal type moves. Chansey will still deal damage to them, and they will still deal damage to Chansey, but Chansey has a crazy stat distribution, which brings me to the next bullet point: the crazy base stat distribution. Chansey has a 60 attack, 128 defense, and a whopping 487 stamina. Unfortunately, that also means that Chansey needs to be maxed out to level 40 and ideally have a 100% IV to be the ideal candidate for the Great League. Something that I didn't mention is that Chansey's downside is also that it costs 75,000 Stardust to add that second move. And because Chansey is a rare Pokemon, getting the candy, the 100 candy, to get that second charge move may be kind of hard as well. So those are some downsides of using Chansey in this cup that I didn't put down. Moving on to the next bullet point, the best position. I believe the best position for Chansey is the lead. This allows you to see what Pokemon they are bringing. If your opponent switches out, you now have the switch advantage. If they stay in, you are dealing damage to something that potentially counters one of your other 2 Pokemon in the back. Although I believe Chansey is best used as a lead, you can use Chansey as a closer as well. Because of Chansey's bulk, you become a pseudo fast move user. Pound over time will deal a decent chunk of damage. This means if your opponent saves shields for the last Pokemon, you can you may still cause that Pokemon to faint with shields up. On the reverse side of that, if your opponent has no shields left, you will be able to get off unshielded Psychics and Hyper Beams. Even with Chansey's poor attack stat, this will still deal a decent chunk of damage against your opponent. Best paired with a Charmer and a Fighter. The reason for this is because Chansey's two main weaknesses are tanks and fighters. Steel tanks will resist everything Chansey does against them, and fighters deal super effective damage to Chansey. So the best way is to pick the hard counters to these two groups. The one Pokemon that doesn't really fit into these two groups is Skarmory. Skarmory is going to be resisting all of Chansey's moves, and well, it's a steel type that deals super effective damage back to those fighters. So keep that in mind if you see a Skarmory on your opponent's team. Maybe reconsider bringing Chansey in at all, because yeah, it's kind of hard to counter that using a Charmer and a Fighter. Best used when the other team has no fighters or no steel or multiple ghost fast attackers. Like I mentioned a second ago, Chansey's two main counters are fighters and steel type Pokemon. So if your opponent doesn't have it, then you have a very good opportunity to have Chansey do a significant amount of damage to your opponent. Or if your opponent is running two ghost fast attackers. What I mean by this is pretty much the Shadow Claws or the Hexes. So Haunter Sableye, Haunter Drifblim, Sableye Drifblim. These are all pretty good situations to use Chansey because it is going to be resisting those fast type attacks. But do keep in mind that Sableye does beat Chansey because its fast attacks are going to be, its charge moves are not resisted by Chansey, so you gotta keep that in mind. For the next bullet point is think twice when the other team has double steel or double fighters. This is because you will not have a strong answer to the second tank or the second fighter if you already used your main counter. For example, you lead Chansey, they lead Probopass. You bring in your Medicham and somehow knock them out. They bring in their Wigglytuff and knock out your Medicham. You bring in your Wigglytuff to counter their Wigglytuff, and you knock out their Wigglytuff. They bring in Steelix. Now you have two Pokemon in Chansey and Wigglytuff that will not do that great against Steelix. You're put in a tough position. So consider not running Chansey when you see double steel or double fighters on your opponent's team. Alright, so right here I have a kind of an infographic of the meta Pokemon versus Chansey. On the left side we have Pokemon that beat Chansey, and on the right side we have Pokemon that will not beat Chansey. This is in a no shield situation because you don't really want to shield Chansey if you don't have to. The only time I feel like you would need to shield Chansey is if your opponent has no more shields and you have a shield and Chansey's your last Pokemon. Those are very situational, and it does come with experience when you will need to use a shield and when you wouldn't use a shield on Chansey. For the most part, you don't want to shield Chansey because Chansey is there to absorb those charge moves anyways. So you want your opponent to throw charge moves at Chansey, run out their energy, and also take pound damage in the meantime, or even burn those shields if Chansey gets to a charge move. So yeah, let's just quickly take a look at the left side. We have Drifblim, Magcargo, Wigglytuff, Blaziken, Medicham, Skarmory, Sableye, Alolan, Graveler, Rhydon, Rhyperior, Machamp, what do we have? Steelix, Gliscor, Alolan, Marowak, and Probopass. So I understand that's a large list, but also those fighters will be taking either neutral damage or super effective damage from Chansey. Hyper Beam does neutral damage to the fighters, and Psychic deals super effective damage to the fighters outside of Medicham. So keep that in mind. And Hyper Beam does a decent chunk of damage other than the tanks that are rock or steel. So those are good situations. Now on the right side we have Magneton, Vileplume, Clefable, Golbat, Haunter, Gligar, Licky, Drapion, and Charizard. So because Chansey is just bulky, it can knock these Pokemon out in the 0 shield situation, and maybe a couple of them in the 1 shield and 2 shield situation, such as Haunter. So keep that in mind. Just made this a quick infographic to kind of give you an overall idea of what Chansey does really well against and what Chansey doesn't do so well against. But you might want to practice and check out PvPoke and run some simulations to find out what situations will be good for your Chansey. For example, if your opponent has 1 shield and you have no shields and you bring in Chansey, but your opponent has about half health left, Chansey might be a good option. Alright, let's get into some battles. So here I lead off with Haunter, he leads off with Sableye. That's a bad matchup for me. I switch into my Chansey. Even though I lose this matchup head on, I can still do some damage to Sableye. I don't have a hard counter to Sableye, so I brought in my Chansey, and my opponent's gonna stay in with with his Sableye, and get off this foul play. As you saw, even though foul play is not resisted or anything, Chansey's so bulky, it just took that foul play with no problem. Get that Hyper Beam, and it does draw the shield, so I'm very lucky. My opponent probably doesn't know the matchups that well, and blocks it, so he uses another charge move, and yeah, I just take it. I don't need to block anything. At this point, I've already won this matchup because I took a shield in a matchup that he would probably win either way. Get a Psychic off, and because my opponent does not know the matchup, he blocks it. So this is where Chansey can become very useful. If your opponent does not know the matchups or the charge moves of Chansey that well, then you can just take the shields, right? Like I didn't shield at all. He brings in Skarmory, which is a super effective Pokemon against my Blaziken, but I am dealing neutral damage with my counters and super effective damage with my Blaziken, so he is going to take a decent chunk. I bring in my Haunter, knock out his Skarmory, farm up some energy because I knew he had a Sableye, and that Shadow Punch is going to be able to knock him out. I'm going straight for the Shadow Punch here because I know he's going to... I tried to get to a Shadow Ball, but go for the Shadow Punch because I think he was almost to a charge move. And I was able to win it with Chansey. So that last battle was a good example of how Chansey can win because your opponent does not know the matchups against Chansey. My opponent used shields. Now, if your opponent has done their research and knows the matchups against Chansey, they'll know that Sableye does not need to block any charge moves against Chansey because Sableye will be resisting all of them. But in the case that your opponent doesn't and does block your charge moves, then that's a plus. And Chansey might do that just because they're very large charge moves. But moving on to the next battle. Okay, so jumping into this next battle, I lead off with Chansey, and my opponent leads off with Purugly. So this is actually a win because Purugly is running Shadow Claw. And as we all know, normal types are resisting ghost type moves, and because Chansey is super bulky, its Shadow Claws are pretty much only doing 1 damage anyways. Gets the charge move off, but that does barely anything to Chansey, and I'm just going to just absorb all these charge attacks, and I'm almost to Hyper Beam. I'm going to go ahead and get this Hyper Beam off. Did switch to Aerodactyl, and Aerodactyl is going to resist that Hyper Beam, and as you saw, Hyper Beam barely does anything to Aerodactyl. So I bring in my Wigglytuff to finish off this Aerodactyl. I do block this because I don't know what other Pokemon he has in the back. I know Wigglytuff will do decent against Purugly because it is resisting those Shadow Claws. He brings out Purugly, gets the charge move off. I go ahead and absorb that really easily. I have a charge move ready. He does have 2 shields though. He brings out Haunter. Get this Ice Beam off. He is going to shield this. Otherwise, it pretty much one-shots Haunter. Again, Wigglytuff is resisting those ghost type moves, so I'm pretty much set. I let that go, and I believe I bring out Charizard. Charizard is going to be able to fast move down this Haunter. He is going to get a charge move off, but I have enough. I have a shield, and that's going to do it. And he had a shield left, so GG. Okay, next battle, I lead off with Chansey, and my opponent leads off with Sableye. And this is a positive or a neutral matchup, but he ends up switching, giving me lead advantage or switch advantage. And so I bring in my Blaziken against the Steelix. I'm going to go ahead and not block this. And unfortunately for me, it was an Earthquake, but I can still. But luckily, I'm able to come out of this. Well, I know it's not over yet because Wigglytuff, even though Steel is resisting those charms, Charm is going to still be dealing a decent chunk of damage. I do have extra shields now because I am down a Pokemon. He decides to use Crunch, and I go ahead and block that. Even though it wouldn't have done super effective damage. He brings in Sableye, which is going to be taking super effective damage from my Charm. So that must mean he doesn't have anything good against my Wigglytuff in the back. I go ahead and use my Ice Beam right here. I think I was trying to switch, but I had already hit Ice Beam. Lets that go. He brings out Sunny Castform. So Sunny Castform is actually making making more impact now than it was earlier because of the large amounts of steel in this cup. Goes ahead and uses Solar Beam, which is an interesting choice. I'm going to go ahead and charge up to my next charge move. And as you see, like, even though he has 2 shields, I'm still doing a decent chunk of damage to him. I'm going to get off this Psychic, and I believe he's going to shield this at this point because he only has 1 Pokemon left. I'm going to be able to get to another Psychic, and I believe, again, he's going to go ahead and shield this because he only has 1 Pokemon left. And as you see, that pound damage is adding up. It is slowly chipping away at that Sunny Castform, and my Chansey is just absorbing all these charge moves. Gets another charge move off, but at this point he is expended pretty much all his energy, and I'm almost at a Ice Beam, and this Ice Beam is going to be able to knock out the Sunny Castform. As you saw, those charge moves were able to burn off his last shields and allow my Wigglytuff to finish him off. GG. Alright, jumping into this next battle. Again, I lead off with Chansey, and he leads off with Blaziken. And this is a bad matchup, but he switches right away into Trash Wormadam. That was an interesting switch right off the bat. I'm going to go ahead and switch into my Blaziken once he gets his charge move off. I know Confusion is going to deal a lot of damage, but I want to try to burn some shields, so I get off this Blaze Kick, and it's not good. He's gonna block it and knock out my Blaziken. Maybe that wasn't the best choice for me, but that was a choice that I made. Now I bring Chansey back in. I probably should have just stayed in with Chansey, but it's okay. Chansey is going to be able to take all these charge moves, and I'm going to be able to put some pressure on this Wormadam Trash. Try to get off this Hyper Beam. No need to block these charge moves again. Chansey is super tanky, and it is going to be Hyper Beam. Not sure if they're going to block it. They do block it. It would have been not very effective damage. So luckily for me, my opponent does not know this matchup very well, or the charge moves of Chansey, or they know that Chansey has Hyper Beam and assume that does a lot of damage. Ends up switching to Blaziken. I am able to get this Psychic off. The Psychic is going to deal a significant amount of damage to this Blaziken, so and lower its defense. I bring in my Wigglytuff, knock out that Blaziken. I do have 2 shields left. These 2 shields are going to be critical. He has no more shields, and I'm going to be able to shield this up. It's going to be an Iron Head, I believe. Would have done super effective damage. I'm going to knock out this Wormadam Trash with my charms. Has Haunter in the back. Perfect. All I need to do is hit this Ice Beam, and Haunter is super squishy, so this should knock him out. And that's going to be GG. Alright guys, that'll do it for this edition of Best's Breakdown. I hope it was fun and informative, and maybe even inspire some of you to use Chansey in your own Rose Cup. If it did, please make sure you hit that thumbs up to like this video, and if you enjoy my content, please make sure you subscribe. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section down below, and that'll do it for this video. Thanks for watching, and until next time, guys, this is Bestinwest. I'll catch you guys later.